Modern Queen Tales presents The Mute Sovereign. The jagged brass altar dug into my bare spine. Blood from my previous battles pooled in the carved geometric grooves beneath my shoulder blades. Green smoke coiled around the cavern roof, tasting of ancient copper and crushed sulfur. The Arcane of Ash loomed above me. His form shifted continually, oscillating between a towering, multi-antlered stag and a cloaked skeletal figure, always wreathed in violet flames that cast dancing shadows across the cavern walls.
Your voice, Amanda.
The arcane purred. His voice scraped against my skull, sounding like grinding granite stones.
The royal cadence. The silken words that command armies and soothe nations. Give that treasure to me, and I will pour the abyss into your veins. I will make you the deadliest creature to walk the waking world.
I nodded once, sharp and decisive. The arcane plunged his incorporeal, smoking claws directly into my throat. Glacial ice flooded my windpipe. The phantom fingers clamped around my vocal cords and pulled upward. Searing agony exploded behind my eyes, turning my vision blinding white. Metallic fluid filled my mouth. I choked on the blood, thrashing against the unyielding stone of the altar. The demon extracted a glowing, pulsing ribbon of golden light from my neck. My voice, my birthright, the song of my ancestors. He swallowed it whole. Instantly, the promised power slammed into my chest. My muscles coiled tighter, hardening into iron cords beneath my skin. The shadows in the cavern detached from the walls. They slithered across the floor, wrapping around my ankles like loyal, ethereal hounds. I opened my mouth to release a scream born of residual pain. A rush of hollow air emerged. Complete silence reigned in my throat. I owned the silence now. It belonged to me. I closed my eyes and let the memory of my damnation fuel the new, dark energy humming in my blood. 3 moons ago, the solstice feast bathed the great hall of Latheria in warm, amber light. Crystal goblets clinked in a joyous rhythm. Roasted boar, honeyed winter root, and spiced wine filled the long oak tables. My father, King Octavian, raised his golden cup to toast the turning of the season. My mother smiled beside him, her diamond diadem catching the brilliant hearth fire. Uncle Severus sat at my father's right hand. Severus wore velvet the color of dried gore. He offered the first sip of the rare vintage wine to my parents, his lips curled in a practiced deferential smile. I watched the poison work its brutal magic. It struck fast. My father's eyes bulged, bloodshot and terrified. He gripped his throat, overturning the heavy table. Porcelain plates shattered against the marble floor. My mother collapsed beside him, crimson foam bubbling over her chin. Severus drew his jewel-encrusted longsword. His loyal guards, the silver fangs, stepped from behind the ancestral tapestries. They slaughtered the remaining royal guard in a synchronized, ruthless dance of steel. Severus stood over my dying father, raised his blade high, and drove the steel straight through the king's heart. I fled through the servant corridors. I navigated the damp, labyrinthine castle undercrofts, eventually splashing through the waist-deep filth of the city sewers to escape the lockdown. I left the opulent gold, the silk sheets, and the safety of my childhood behind forever. I emerged days later in the barren valley, the undisputed territory of the Merciless mercenary company. The sensory shift assaulted me. In the palace, sweet lavender incense masked the smell of humanity. Here, the air reeked of cheap, fermented ale, forging coal, and raw desperation. The mercenaries lived in a sprawling, subterranean complex of damp granite and rusted iron gratings. I traded my sapphire earrings for a chipped dagger and a place in their brutal fighting pits. Aiden became my master. He stood in the center of the underground sparring ring, a mountain of scarred muscle. A jagged gouge ran from his left temple to his jaw, replacing his eye with a puckered hollow. He communicated entirely through sharp, precise hand gestures and the heavy thud of his oak training staff against the hard-packed dirt. He swung the staff at my head. I ducked, feeling the wind of the blow rustle my roughly chopped hair. I lunged forward with my wooden practice blade. He sidestepped smoothly, bringing the butt of his staff hard into my ribs. Bone cracked. I hit the dirt, tasting the familiar tang of blood. Aiden tapped the ground twice. "Stand up." I pushed myself up. My body throbbed with a constant rhythmic ache. Weeping blisters covered my palms, leaking clear fluid over the wrapped leather of my hilt. The transition from a sheltered princess who spent her days embroidering tapestries to a lethal bruiser in the mud exacted a steep physical toll. My muscles burned daily. My skin hardened into thick, unyielding calluses. Aiden circled me slowly. He pointed to his own ear, then pointed to the dark corners of the room where the torchlight failed. "Listen to the dark." I breathed in the dusty, stale air. With my voice gone, my brain reallocated its vast resources. My hearing sharpened into a razor edge. I tracked the rhythmic thud of Aiden's heartbeat in his chest. I heard the faint, telltale creak of his leather armor stretching a fraction of a second before he shifted his weight. I smelled the faint, metallic tang of his sweat. He attacked again. I predicted the strike flawlessly. My body flowed to the right, a leaf on a violent wind. I channeled the arcane's dark gift. The shadows clinging to the training ring posts detached, swirling around my wooden blade in a vortex of pure night. I slashed upward. The shadow-enhanced wood cleaved clean through Aiden's thick oak staff, stopping exactly 1 inch from his throat. Aiden lowered the broken stick. A grim, terrifying smile touched his scarred face. He tapped his chest, then bowed his head deeply. He recognized my silence as the ultimate tactical asset. A warrior who bypasses battle cries, who swallows the gasps of pain, gives the enemy zero information. I existed as a terrifying void on the battlefield. I moved like water and struck like lightning. For 2 years, I bled on that dirt floor. I mastered the twin-curved daggers, the perfectly balanced throwing knives, and the suffocating garrote wire. I learned to blend seamlessly with the night, commanding the darkness to cloak my movements. I became the ghost of the Merciless. I became a weapon forged in betrayal and sharpened by silence. The capital city of Latheria reeked of rot upon my return. Severus's rule had bled the city completely dry. I walked through the massive iron gates clad in coarse, brown wool, a frayed hood pulled low over my face. I adopted the hunched, broken posture of a tired laborer. Slums swallowed the outer ring of the city. Tents of rotting canvas huddled desperately against the majestic marble walls of the inner keep. Starving children picked through massive, festering garbage piles. Severus diverted all the realm's wealth to his sycophantic inner circle and his bloated military, abandoning the common folk to disease and hunger. I began my systematic dismantling the next night. The Empire relied heavily on a massive supply chain of grain and black powder stored in the eastern warehouses. I scaled the 20-foot stone wall, my conjured shadows acting as solid footholds in the sheer rock face. 3 heavily armed guards patrolled the perimeter. I dropped silently behind the first, slipping my wire garrote around his neck and pulling tight. He collapsed into my arms, his final moments utterly quiet. I moved to the next 2. A flick of my wrists sent 2 throwing knives burying deep into their windpipes simultaneously. They dropped like stones onto the cobblestones. I set the explosive charges using the military's own stockpile of black powder. I lit the slow-burning hemp fuse and vanished back over the high wall. 5 minutes later, The night sky erupted in brilliant orange fire. The explosion shook the city bedrock. The grain silos and powder magazines burned, turning the eastern sky into a hellish, churning landscape. Next, I targeted the critical communication lines. Severus utilized a network of fast-riding couriers stationed at the Silver Post. I infiltrated the royal stables at midnight. I sliced the leather saddle girths to break upon bearing a rider's weight. I fed the prized horses oats laced with nightshade, administering just enough poison to sicken them, and ground the entire fleet for weeks. A week later, I entered the royal citadel itself. I wore the gray linen dress and white apron of a lowly scullery maid, carrying a heavy wicker basket of soiled linens. I walked the very halls I used to run through as a laughing child. The irony settled heavy and cold in my chest. I passed beneath the massive silk tapestry of my grandfather, King Valerius, depicting his glorious victory at the Crimson River. 2 armored palace guards walked past me, loudly discussing their mounting gambling debts. They completely ignored the servant girl scrubbing the polished stone floor. I remained entirely invisible in my own home, a ghost haunting the castle of my birthright. I memorized every patrol route. I noted the precise timing of the shift changes. I mapped the exact locations of my designated targets. I prepared the stage for the final act. Lord Bane served as master of coin. He orchestrated the intricate financing of Severus's bloody coup. He lived in a sprawling, opulent manor in the Black Peaks, surrounded by velvet curtains and priceless marble statues. I visited him during a violent thunderstorm. The heavy rain masked the sound of my glass cutter slicing his window pane. I slipped through his second-story balcony doors. Bane slept in a massive 4-poster bed, snoring softly into down pillows. His young mistress slept beside him, oblivious to the intrusion. I stepped to the edge of the bed. I drew my iron dagger, the blade drinking the ambient light. I pressed my left hand firmly over Bane's mouth and drove the blade directly into his heart. His eyes snapped open, wide with sudden, primal terror. He thrashed violently, but my grip held the supernatural strength of the arcane's magic. He died, staring into the endless void of my hood. I left a silver coin bearing my father's minted face resting squarely on his closed eyelids. General Roll commanded the Silver Fangs. He possessed the raw strength of a grizzly bear and the tactical cunning of a desert fox. He required a vastly different approach. I ambushed him in the royal armory. Roll stood alone amidst rows of gleaming weapons, inspecting a rack of halberds. I dropped from the high wooden rafters, landing silently on the stone floor directly behind him. Roll sensed the subtle displacement of air. He spun instantly, swinging a massive 2-handed broadsword in a deadly arc. I ducked beneath the whistling steel, the blade shaving a stray lock of my hair. I summoned the shadows. Thick tendrils of pure darkness erupted from the corners of the room, wrapping tightly around Roll's thick wrists and heavily armored ankles. He roared like a wounded beast, straining against the magical bonds. "Assassin! Guards to the armory!" His shouts echoed in the cavernous, sealed room. I had already barred the heavy oak doors from the inside with a thick iron rod. I stepped forward into the lantern light. I allowed my hood to fall back, revealing my face. Roll recognized the sharp royal jawline and the ice-blue eyes of my lineage, his flushed face drained of all color. "Princess Amanda." I offered zero reply. I simply raised my dagger and slashed his throat in one fluid, unstoppable motion. Arterial blood sprayed across the polished armor racks, painting the steel red. I laid another silver coin on his chest and melted into the deep shadows just as the frantic guards finally breached the heavy doors. Panic gripped the remaining nobility. Lord Bane and General Roll, dead within a single week. Whispers of a silent, unstoppable shadow stalking the elite filled the taverns and the royal courtyards. Nobles doubled their personal guards. They consumed copious amounts of wine to force sleep. The psychological terror rotted their confidence from the inside out. They jumped at shifting light and trembled at the wind. The climax arrived on the night of the blood moon. The sky glowed a sickly, bruised crimson. I marched straight through the towering main doors of the throne room, my boots ringing loud and clear on the marble. Severus sat trembling on the stone throne. 10 of his most elite silver fangs stood in a tight, defensive ring around him. Severus looked hollowed out, deeply paranoid, his bloodshot eyes darting at every flickering shadow cast by the braziers. I walked slowly, deliberately up the long central aisle. "Kill her!" Severus shrieked, pointing a violently shaking finger at my approaching figure. The guards rushed me in a coordinated wave of steel. I unleashed the full, terrifying fury of the Arcane's pact. I moved faster than the human eye could track. My twin daggers became blurs of silver, steel, and black magic. I parried a spear thrust, stepped inside the guard's reach, and drove my blade deep into his ribs. I spun fluidly, sweeping the legs out from under another soldier, and finished him with a brutal strike to the base of his skull. Shadows whipped around me in a localized hurricane. The darkness blinded my enemies, tripped their feet, and acted as a physical extension of my boundless rage. In 60 seconds, all 10 elite guards lay dead on the blood-slicked marble floor. I stood at the base of the dais, my blades dripping crimson onto the white stone. Severus drew his ornate sword and stumbled clumsily down the steps. "You think you can take this crown from me? I am the rightful king. I saved this weak empire from your pathetic father." I kept my absolute silence. I raised my daggers and engaged him. Severus fought with the messy desperation of a cornered rat. He swung wildly, leaving massive openings in his defense. I dismantled him piece by agonizing piece. I sliced the thick tendons in his right wrist, forcing him to drop his royal sword with a clatter. I kicked out his left knee with bone-shattering force, bringing him crashing to the floor. He looked up at me, abject terror finally breaking his arrogant facade. "Wait, Amanda, please. I am your uncle. We share royal blood. I will give you anything. Riches, land, absolute power. Spare my life!" He begged openly. The pathetic words spilled from his mouth in a frantic, weeping stream. I stepped firmly on his chest, pinning him to the floor. I looked deep into his eyes, forcing him to see the absolute icy void where my mercy used to live. I brought my dagger down in a precise strike, severing his vocal cords first. He gagged violently, choking on his own blood, experiencing the sudden, terrifying silence I had endured for years. I waited exactly 3 heartbeats, letting him fully understand the profound poetry of his punishment. I watched the realization dawn in his dying eyes. Then, I drove the blade straight through his heart, pinning him to the stone and ending his miserable existence. Severus's blood pooled over the intricate mosaic of the royal seal. I wiped my daggers clean on his velvet cloak and sheathed them at my hips. I walked up the marble steps, stopping just short of the stone throne, and turned to face the vast, empty hall. The heavy oak doors burst open. The city watch flooded into the room, their long halberds raised and ready. They stopped dead in their tracks, staring at the sheer carnage. They looked at the dead king, the slaughtered elite guards, and finally up at the blood-soaked woman standing triumphant on the dais. Captain Raymond, a grizzled old veteran who had served loyally under my father, lowered his weapon slowly. He stared intently at my face. Recognition dawned bright and clear in his eyes. He dropped heavily to one knee and bowed his head. Slowly, inevitably, the rest of the guards followed suit, a massive wave of clattering armor filling the grand room in an act of absolute submission. They knew the truth. The silent sovereign had reclaimed the hall. I walked down the steps, passing straight through their kneeling ranks. I stepped out onto the high stone balcony, overlooking the expansive city square. Word of the breach had spread like wildfire. The common folk had gathered by the thousands, holding blazing torches that painted the deep night in warm, flickering gold. They chanted my true name. They cheered wildly for the death of the tyrant. They rallied behind the towering legend of the silent protector who had burned the rotting core of the empire to ash and returned the city to the people. I looked at the massive stone throne resting in the hall behind me. The cold metal held the deep stains of generations of betrayal, greed, and murder. The heavy golden crown felt like a shackle waiting to lock me in a cage. Reclaiming that physical throne meant returning to the opulent, deceitful life that had murdered my family. It meant dealing in the treacherous currency of lies, politics, and hollow promises. I had evolved into a master of death. I spoke exclusively the brutal, honest language of steel and shadow. The grand throne room felt small and suffocating compared to the vast, open night sky. I raised my fist high to the crowd. A deafening roar of triumph echoed off the ancient castle walls, shaking the very foundations of Latheria. I turned my back on the balcony, bypassing the throne entirely. I slipped effortlessly back into the hidden secret passages behind the tapestries. The Empire needed a dedicated leader, and they would forge one from the ashes. A council of the resilient people, perhaps. Or the Honorable Captain Raymond. I would leave the bureaucracy of daylight to them. I chose the shadows. I chose to remain the unseen blade, the silent, terrifying guardian watching over Latheria from the high rooftops. I found a new, purer way to rule. I would enforce absolute justice in the dark, ensuring the rotting corruption never took root in my city again. I gave my voice to the abyss, and in return, I became the very breath of vengeance. The end.
If you enjoyed this quick escape, hit the subscribe button for new stories twice a week. Until then, I'll see you at the next flip of the pages.